Trina, we're on the Speak Your Truth with Mark Ross podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ross, and with me this evening, uh, Trina Kennedy. Trina, you hail from Alberta, Canada, and it's snowing up there at this point in time, or I should say, snowed. It snowed.
It
Uh,
did indeed.
wow. Trina, thank you very much for coming on to the show. I really do appreciate it. I know you mentioned before we got started that you had a very busy day, so I thank you for taking the time to to speak with me
You're
because
so welcome.
I think that this conversation will be is well needed, well had because as I explained in many of my other uh, podcast episodes, Trina, this is about mental health, and mental health is real. It affects everybody in some form or fashion, and with some people, it affects them more than others. Right?
Mhm.
We can all agree with that. Uh, as a you're clinically you're a social worker by trade, and you're also a mental health you're into the mental health first aid business too, right?
Yeah, I'm a
uh,
mental health first aid instructor through the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Yeah.
Now before we get started, I would like for you to go in detail as to what that is, being a
Sure.
mental first aid instructor.
Absolutely. So, mental health first aid was actually originally the curriculum was developed in Australia, and mental health first aid is used, and I believe it's over 30 countries at this point. So it is internationally recognized, and it's an evidence-based research program that has evidence behind it to show that it's effective. And so what mental health first aid does is it aims to give these skills and the framework to the participants who get trained as aid, mental health first aiders to recognize when someone's mental health is declining or if somebody's experienced a mental health crisis, to give them the framework of knowing how to support them and encouraging them to appropriate professional help and how to start that conversation. Because I think that can be really scary for a lot of people is maybe we recognize somebody's struggling, but we don't know how to start that conversation or kind of where those boundaries lie. Is it our responsibility? Isn't our responsibility? So I think it gets pretty gray and murky. So the mental health first aid program aims to teach all of those things using, as I said, a evidence-based research kind of framework of how to do that, how to support individuals. And so it's very much like physical first aid, right? You take your physical first aid training to how to recognize when somebody's having a medical emergency, and then what you do to intervene until professional help can
Mm,
be received. It's the same thing, just from the mental health perspective.
got you, got you. I think I explained to you during our initial conversation that we had something like that, uh, where you have people that go to uh, crisis scenarios, and we talk with people that are going through mental health crisis. Uh, I do think, from a personal standpoint, that we need more of that in others,
Absolutely.
right? Because you hear too many times where police are called and they are not equipped to deal with a mental health crisis. So what they do is they incapacitate the person or they take the person out altogether,
Correct. Yes.
right? So we need to do better in that regard. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we need to call the appropriate people into certain scenarios rather than just calling the police out at the first crack of any trouble or drama, right?
Right. I mean, the beautiful thing with this framework, Mark, is it's for anyone to take, right? It's neighbors, it's moms, dads, brothers, sisters, coworkers, right? Community members. And
Mm-hmm.
what I love about this is it says we all have a part. We
Mm-hmm.
all have a responsibility in helping each other. Because if we just wait for the police or the government or public services to save us or to be the people who intervene, we're in big trouble. Well, we're already in big trouble,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We
yeah.
have epidemics of mental health issues, I think, all over the world, certainly in Canada. And I know I work with an organization out of Nigeria, Africa. I mean, everybody is dealing with the same sorts of things. So this really is about taking personal responsibility
Mm,
boundaried responsibility. That's important, right? Like we're not people who get trained as mental health first aiders aren't professionals. We're not saying go out and do mental health therapy. That's certainly not what the training is geared to, but it's about we all have a responsibility in recognizing when someone's struggling and then knowing how to, I like to use the analogy of being that hand that's reaching into the dark corner to say, "Hey, I'm here. Grab on if you'd like. Let's figure this out together and let's get you some help."
hmm hmm And what got you involved in mental health advocacy? I know that you spoke about your upbringing and whatnot, but and I think that that kind of played a role into it. But for the listeners, I would like for you to talk about your journey from where you were to where you are.
Well, I don't think your show's that long, Mark, but I'll do my best to give you the Coles Note version.
You're condensed.
Well, we all have a story. We have all been
You do.
impacted by trauma to some level. And so I grew up in a loving family, two-parent home. I had two younger siblings, sisters. And I grew up in the generation where my parents didn't have the tools to know how to support around emotional regulation, right? It was very much, I was a child who felt emotions really big. And so if I was crying or something like that, I would get the quit your crying or I'm going to give you something to cry about, right?
Mhm.
My emotions were very much dismissed, criticized, um, laughed at sometimes even. So I learned really quickly as a child that it wasn't safe to share or to feel even certain emotions. And you can only do that for so long. You can only stuff those things for so long before
Mhm.
that begins to impact our mental health. And I think that's a big part of what we see in the world right now is, especially in Western society, we don't do a good job of talking about our emotions or naming them or making space for them or any of those things. So they get locked in our body. The body keeps the score. And
Oh,
so
absolutely.
and so I could only do that for so long. You can only do that for so long before it impacts mental health. And so I probably around the age of 14, I started to experience anxiety and depression quite severely. And then by 16, I felt the only way out of my pain was to end my life. And I had a really significant suicide attempt. I ended up in the psychiatric ward for 2 weeks, which actually just compounded and made everything worse. It certainly wasn't helpful in my
Mhm.
experience.
Mhm.
And so that really launched me into my healing journey. I mean, I started my healing, shortly after that experience when my mom connected me to an incredible psychologist, Joan Bailey. And she really was the first adult in my life at that point that I had experienced somebody who made me feel seen, heard, and understood. And that was a really powerful relationship because it was from that place I could start to unpack and process all the emotions I'd been, storing and numbing and ignoring and deflecting and minimizing, all those things that we do. And so it was really after that relationship that I had with her where I thought, I want to do that. I want to create that space and I want to hold that space for
Mhm.
other people who are struggling, just as she did with me. And so at first I thought about going into psychology, and then I realized that was a lot of schooling. And I wasn't particularly a strong student in junior high or high school.
Yeah.
So I kind of started into the human services field with my child and youth care diploma. And that's kind of what got me into the human services field and working with vulnerable populations. And so it kind of evolved. And really, no matter where I went, there was always an aspect of mental health. There was my mental health. Certainly, I have a sister who I actually lost almost 5 years ago to a drug overdose. She had
Mhm.
significant mental health issues all of her adult life.
Mhm.
Other members in my family have struggled with their mental health.
Mhm.
Certainly, my clients, right? And so it just kind of moved me into wanting to better understand what mental health meant and what that looked like and how I could help. And then we became a lot more trauma informed about 15 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe, where we started to understand trauma in a much deeper level. So mental health and trauma just sort of became my area of first interest. And then as I delved in and took more training, it certainly became my area of focus and expertise. I wrote a book a year ago called From Trauma to Triumph and What Lies Between. So that was really talking about my own story around my healing and my trauma, but
Wow.
also intertwined with my understanding about trauma. And certainly trauma and mental health are very closely linked when we
Mhm.
look at the state of the world in terms
Mhm.
of substance use issues, suicides, domestic violence, crime. I really believe that those are all symptoms of a much deeper issue, and those usually stem from trauma and or mental health issues.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask you later on about your book to talk about it, but you already brought it up, so there's
There's
that.
that.
uh, your sister, you used to it was you and two sisters.
Correct. Yep. Two younger sisters.
Okay, and I understand where you're coming from in terms of the upbringing because I grew up in that same environment, that same era where you had to suck that up
Yep.
and crying because you fell and got a little, a bruise on your arm, or somebody punched you. You suck that up and you fight back,
Mhm.
or I'm going to give you something to cry about,
Hmm.
right? You got cut, put some butter on there. I'm old school, so
Yep.
moms and pop, no, you suck that up.
Yep.
Ain't no crying unless I whoop your ass. If I get in your ass, that's the reason to cry. Otherwise, don't be crying in front of me. What's wrong with you?
Yep.
But in terms of what you said about your sisters, did they endure more in the home than you did for
Well,
for her reaction to be so severe, let's say?
right. So that's a really great question, Mark. So, I mean, I think if you ask my younger sisters, Tanya is my middle sister, the one that's passed away, and then Tara is the youngest. I mean, we all grew up in the same family, but we were different people. We were different personalities. We experienced the world differently. So I think if you had asked Tanya and Tara their experiences growing up, there would be probably some similarities, but also differences. I know another added layer for Tanya was she was the middle child of three girls. So I don't know if you're into birth order, but there's certainly some things that go into, characteristics or
Yeah,
personality traits of certain birth orders.
sure.
She said for, a lot of her life, she always felt like the black sheep and that she really felt that, she didn't belong in the family. So I think that was an added component to her experience.
Hmm.
And she also experienced sexual abuse. So she disclosed to us probably when she was about 18 that she had been sexually abused by one of our neighbors. So there was definitely a deeper level of trauma experience for Tanya. And so, the research shows that for those of us who had more of what we call those little T traumas, so I don't want to say insignificant, but in and of themselves may not have been traumatic. They're like, I call it in my book, like a death by a thousand little cuts, those little T traumas. Tanya's sexual abuse that she experienced was a bigger T trauma, probably along with a lot of littler T traumas in her childhood experience. So typically, people who experience those smaller T traumas, our coping
Give me an
strategies.
example of a little T trauma.
Okay, well, being yelled at and told to suck it up.
Ah,
Maybe
okay.
your parents getting divorced, being
Uh,
bullied to varying degrees. Sometimes being bullied could be someone's big T trauma, but it could be
yeah.
someone's little T trauma.
Uh-huh.
Losing a pet. I failed grade three. I wrote about it in my book. I failed grade three, and again because I was just told, "Oh, you got to repeat grade three," and that was it. There was no conversation. There was no really explaining. There was no letting me process that. That was trauma for me. I was so embarrassed and ashamed, and it was an awful experience. So again, what might be someone's small T trauma may also be someone's big T trauma. I think that's really important to also explain that trauma is very subjective, and trauma isn't so much what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you because of what happens to you.
Say that again, please. Trauma
So,
isn't.
tr so trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma
Uh,
is what happens inside of you because of what happened to you. So you
uh,
can have someone who experienced the exact same traumatic event, but walk away having very different experiences. So it's an experience that evokes a deep sense of fear and lack of safety. And safety isn't just physical safety. Safety can also be emotional and mental safety as well. And
absolutely.
so and so typically those people who experience little, and we've all experienced little T traumas at least. We've all had moments or experiences in our life where we felt completely hopeless and not safe in the moment. So with little T traumas, typically the coping strategies look like, or at least it did for me, perfectionism, passive aggressive, people pleasing. Those
Mm,
are actually trauma responses. Bigger T traumas, that's where we can see more of those really drastic, like bigger mental health issues like post-traumatic stress disorder. Maybe people resort to substances as a way to numb, right? That the significant psychological pain that they're experiencing because of that traumatic event. So yes, Tanya had a lot more trauma, definitely. And I think that definitely had a significant impact on the level of mental health issues she had, as well as the substance use issues that she struggled with on and off most of her adult life.
Mm, mm. Uh, how did I don't know if I should ask this question right now. Uh, I think I will. How did you overcome all all that? Because you had to witness that from your younger sister.
Hmm.
You you were the first. I'm assuming you're the oldest.
I'm the
So
oldest, yeah.
so you had to they had to watch you. Well, you guys all went through it, right? Just in varying degrees, as you said, but you were the first, and you had to observe your younger siblings go through what they went through, along with what you went through, and going seeing all that. I mean, how did you say, I can't let this conquer my life. I'm done with this shit. How did you flip the script, so to speak, on all that?
Oh,
Because
I think there's such a long process. There's so many kind of components to that. I think initially, when Tanya became an adult and it was really clear that, she was struggling with her mental health. We didn't know about the substances at that point.
mm,
And I was the oldest, right? And I was the one who appeared to have it all together, right? Because again, that perfectionism was my coping strategy. So it looked outside to the whole world that I had my shit together. I'm going to college and I'm in doing human services. So Trina must have all the answers. So I was kind of cast into this role of peacekeeper as well as guide this process. Trina, what does this look like? How do we support Tanya? So like my parents and my younger sister, they really looked to me for that. And I think that was a really big responsibility. And it was a responsibility that shouldn't have been mine. But family dynamics are very tricky.
mm,
And
mm,
so that's initially what it started. And a part of my coping strategy as well was what we call intellectualizing. So I would intellectualize in my head, Tanya's challenges. But intellectualization is actually a way, it's also a trauma response because what it did is it kept me separate from the emotions or the impact that some of her behaviors had. And she was challenging. She did a lot of things, again, because of the substance use and because of her mental health issues, that created harm to the family, that created a lot of impact to us. And and yes, she was struggling, but her behaviors created a lot of struggle for us as well. I mean, it's really difficult to watch somebody you love on self-destruct mode, essentially,
mm,
because she blew up a lot of times, but there was a lot of us who were hit with the shrapnel, so to speak, just to use that analogy. And so that was really difficult to watch. And there was a long time that I wasn't processing the emotional impact that those things were having on me, because it was just easier to keep those emotions locked up. Because again, at that point, I still was doing my own healing and still trying to figure out how to even work through and process my own emotions. So there was a long time we had a very complicated relationship. She had actually a very complicated relationship with all of my family. Um, and it took me probably, well, it did. It took me a long time to learn healthy boundaries. How do I safely love her while keeping myself emotionally safe, given the choices she was making in her life? And so I done a lot of kind of my own healing and boundary work around my relationship with Tanya probably 2 years before she passed.
mm,
And so when she did pass, my grieving looked much different than my mom and my sister's grieving looked, because I think they carried it just from what they'd shared. They carried a lot of their own guilt around what had happened and, should we have done something different and could we have done something more? Whereas I got to the place where, I was able to be at peace with Tanya's choices or Tanya's choices. I'm not responsible for her choices. I'm
Mm,
not responsible for the consequences of those choices that she makes. I
mm.
can love her and I can keep myself safe in that relationship. And that was a really challenging thing to figure out, but I'm just so grateful I was able to do that, prior to her passing because my grieving, I think, just looked so much different than my mom and my sisters did. I don't know if that answered your question or not, Mark.
Oh, no, well, no, that's fine. Uh, Overcoming, like you said, it's a process, and it's not overnight. Uh, because, and I guess this kind of leads to this question: as part of the overcoming, did you ever feel guilty?
Oh yeah, I felt guilty probably right up to probably that 2 years when right before she passed, when I kind of really started to see things differently. I felt guilty all the time, right? I felt responsible. I felt guilty. That allowed, I think, her to, there was certainly some manipulation and gaslighting. She did have borderline personality disorder. So there was a lot of, she's the victim and it's everybody else's fault that her life is what it was. And so that, she was able to kind of draw us into a lot of dysfunctional patterns. And I had so much guilt, right? I had
Mm,
guilt when I rescued her and I had guilt when I didn't. And right, it just seemed no matter what I did, I carried this guilt. And that was to the point where I got no more. Like, why am I carrying this guilt
mm.
for the choices she's making, right? We've offered her help. We said we'd support her through that help. She's choosing to not take that help, and that's her choice. I wouldn't choose that for her, but at the end of the day, it's her choice to make that. And I just had to come to peace with that and know she owned that, not me. And again, it was a long process to be able to get to that point.
Oh, let me. This is an off the cuff question, but
Okay.
let's stay there for a second. Do you do you find it uh, more? Do you find that people do that, like guilt trip other people about their issues to the point where you might feel like, oh, well, I'm responsible for how he or she is feeling, right? Kind of like gaslighting, I guess, in a certain way, right? And people may not do it intentionally, but I think it's a defense mechanism, one that they can't help.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think it's a lot of it is subconscious, Mark. And I think a lot of it is when somebody feels like they're a victim and that they
Mm,
have no power or control,
mhm.
right? They will talk in ways that demonstrate they're a victim, which somebody else may interpret that as, oh my God, they have no power. I need to help them. But then that's about the story that person's telling themselves. And so if we've been raised that, particularly as women, social conditioning tells women and sometimes men too, not just women, but that it's our job to meet the needs of everybody else. That if we don't meet the needs of everyone else, we're selfish, right? That's very much a social conditioning that a lot of women face. So when someone then is struggling and they have a need and they're saying, I need your help, then we tell the story of, okay, it's my job or my responsibility to help you. And if I don't do that, I'm being selfish. So I think there's stories that we're telling each other on both sides of that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting because the new information coming out of neuroscience says that 95% of our choices, actions, and behaviors and responses to situation are at the subconscious level. 95%.
So they
Only
don't
five, no, so
even
they're
think
not even
about what they're
aware.
doing. It's just
No, they're
impulse
just
control.
doing it. They're just reacting. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I would agree with that.
That's incredible. I'm pausing because I'm just letting this digest, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm digesting it because we, as a society, we have all grown up dealing with big T traumas and little T traumas, and how we dealt with both, if at all, played a great role as to how we think, how we view relationships, how we view ourselves, how we view life.
Yep. Absolutely.
And they are, they, or meaning many of us, we could be walking and talking in survival mode and don't even know it.
Oh, I'm going to say 90% of the time. And that's what happens when we don't heal the trauma.
Mm,
We walk around in that old story. So I'll just
mm,
give an example of how this shows up. So when we experience things, particularly as children, when our brains aren't fully developed, we internalize everything to be our fault. That it, intellectualizing, I can now look back at my childhood and recognize that, my dad's response was because he was raised in the same way. He was raising us the way he was raised, right? He didn't understand what emotional regulation meant. He didn't understand that, emotions should be neutral and, everybody has the right to feel how they feel in whatever context they feel it. And that he was causing, self-esteem issues and mental health issues. Like, I understand that now, but as a little girl, when I'm emotionally distressed and I'm saying, I'm needing the care, love, and support of my caregivers, and I don't get that, the story then becomes, I'm not worthy. I'm unseen. I don't matter. That's my
mm,
story.
mm,
That's my subconscious story, right? And so I'm going through life, even as a grown woman, starting to already have done my healing work, looking through that lens of I'm not worthy, I don't matter, and people don't see me. And so just one example of how these things can show up. I was cooking dinner one night and it was my husband's turn to cook, but he was running late. And he'd called to let me know he'd be late, so no big deal. I was at the stove ready, things were pretty much ready. He walked in, he said hi, gave me a kiss, and then all of a sudden he walked over to the stove and he started stirring things and turning things up and turning things down and moving stuff around. And I was instantly triggered, like instant anger. And I'd already been quite a ways into my healing work where I'd learned that, you know, our triggers are actually our greatest teacher because when we're triggered in those moments says, okay, there's a wound here that needs tending to. That's what triggers tell me now that I understand. And so I was instantly dysregulated or triggered. And right away, Stephen felt it. And so he looks at me and he's like, what's wrong? And again, my passive aggressive, and I'm passive aggressive because I learned that it wasn't safe to talk about how I was feeling. And if you don't talk it out, you act it out. And so my response was nothing, right? And this really sharp, yeah, I mean, everyone
mm.
can relate to that. So my words were saying nothing, but my body language, my facial
Yeah.
expression, and my tone of voice were saying I'm freaking pissed off, right? So he's just like looks at me and he's like, oh, okay. And a lot of our relationship had been like that, Mark. I mean, we've been together since high school, and so, we never really addressed anything head on. It was this passive aggressive, I'm gonna ignore you for 3 days, like just passive aggressive. And so I stopped in that moment and I'm like, okay, what just happened? What happened? Why was I just so triggered? And so now when I notice I'm being triggered, I ask myself, what was the story you just told yourself? So that's my subconscious brain trying to delve down into my subconscious and try and figure out what that subconscious story was that I told myself when Stephen walked in and did what he did that created my emotional response. And I realized in that moment when I said, what was your story? My story was, you're not doing it right. I'm going to show you how to do it properly. Because an aspect of my dad was he was quite a critical person. It felt like everything I did, he criticized or judged. So that was the lens. Had nothing to do with Stephen. It was that action brought me back to my childhood where I believed, right, when someone was correcting me or showing me how to do it right, it was because, you're not doing it right. I'm going to show you how to do it right. So I recognized that and I said to Stephen, okay, so I just want to apologize. I was totally overreacted there, but I want you to know the story I told myself when you walked in and did that. The story was that I wasn't doing it right and you were going to show me how to do it properly. And he's like, oh my God, that wasn't the story at all. I walked in and said, here she is cooking supper. It was my night to cook. She's cooked every night this week. I want to be helpful.
Mm.
And so there was this complete disconnect, right? But I think it's an example of how our old stories from our childhood that we haven't healed show up in a relationship over and over and over again until we start to recognize the story and change the pattern.
I'm digesting again, so
Okay, that was a lot.
yeah. No, well, it was well said though,
Thank you.
because I think a lot of people do what you just did.
Yep.
A lot of us,
Yep.
we 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 still operate under the guise that we are okay, but really we're not.
No.
Why do you think people? This is personal. Why do you think people run from getting help for their past traumas?
Because again, we're socially conditioned to believe that asking for help is weakness. We fear being judged. Right? We look around and we see how, people with mental health issues are, mocked or portrayed in the movies, right? And we internalize that as, oh my God, like they're going to think I'm nuts. They're going to think I'm crazy. And our brain, our amygdala, that fight, flight, freeze part of our brain is going to amplify risk because its job is to keep us safe. And so that's what I call the monster in our heads in my book. Anytime it feels scary or unfamiliar or unpredictable, our monster gets really loud in hopes that it paralyzes us in fear, and we don't do that hard or scary thing because we don't know what the outcome's going to be, right? So we get hijacked essentially. And we, again, 95% of our decision making is at that subconscious level based on all the experiences we've had building up to that point. So it feels so vulnerable to ask for help. And vulnerability is scary. We've been conditioned to believe it's weakness, especially men.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And speaking of mental health and uh, counseling, you are you're a lead ambassador for a movement in Nigeria that deals
Correct.
with mental health, right?
Yes. Yep.
Ch- Talk to me about that. Talk to our viewers about what you do, because this all leads to this question here, because the conversation we had was so eye-opening. I knew that mental health was real because I experienced it and I deal with it myself firsthand. And I also know that here in the States, we deal with it low key more than we need to, right? So when these outbursts happen, these uh, these mental health moments happen, and they're happening more often. If you didn't notice, it's because we're dealing with a lot of unresolved stuff.
Hmm.
But talk to me about what you do for the country of Nigeria as it relates to this.
So I'm a brand ambassador with Lead Foundation, which is it was developed by Calvin I always mispronounce his name, Ojuji. Um, he in
Close enough.
2018, yeah, he always laughs when I try. I'm sorry, I never say it correctly. He experienced his own mental health crisis and got help, but it was a struggle. And he created this mission of, there's no services in Nigeria. So Nigeria has 22 million people. That's just a small state in Africa.
Mhm.
22 million people in something a little bit bigger than the size of Alberta, the province I live in. I can't even wrap my head around that. And there's only 200 psychologists or psychiatrists to serve that population. There is no publicly funded mental health supports. It's all fee for service, but there's a high rate of poverty within Nigeria, so people do not have the funds. And then there's Kelvin sent me this horrific YouTube video of these hospitals, and I use that term very loosely of where people go if there's no, if their mental health is to the point where they need intervention, like maybe they're experiencing psychosis or schizophrenia. These hospitals, these individuals were chained to the floor. They eat where they defecate. They're maybe get one meal a day if they're lucky. They were literally treated like animals or like they're in prison, dirt floors, a tiny little mattress on the floor. Like that's their help. That's their hospitals. And the other piece of that is suicide is still a crime. So if someone attempted suicide, they could be put in jail. So you have all these layers of issues of why it is so incredibly difficult to get mental health support in Nigeria. Um, and epidemic, huge suicide rates within Nigeria as well. It's just like all over the world as well, but certainly in Nigeria. And so the Lead Foundation's mission is to increase mental health literacy, start the conversations. Oh, and another aspect is the religious component. So essentially, there's a strong religious belief that if someone is struggling with mental health issues, they haven't prayed enough, they need to pray more. Or
Mm.
if they have a mental health crisis, that it's, they've been taken over by Satan. And, so an additional very strong religious layer to this, to the challenges that they face. So I've been working with Lead Foundation volunteering for the past 2 years. So they have volunteers who go out into communities and who talk about mental health and really try to reduce the stigma. They're in schools. They've spoken to thousands of children in school settings. They try and provide some mental health interventions for people who need it. And they don't get a single dollar from the government. They actually were trying to have a mental health conference that I was going to go speak at in November. They were hoping to get government funding, but they did not, so they had to cancel it. So this is all corporate sponsors or private donors that they rely on in order to be able to continue to do the work. So I provide training for the volunteers. So I've done trauma-informed care training, all done through Zoom and stuff like that. But suicide prevention, those kinds of trainings, I volunteer my time to be able to give the skills and support to the volunteers. And so yeah, they just named me a brand ambassador here this past month. Just working with them to talk about all the incredible work they're doing.
Well, congratulations on what you do. Obviously, it's well needed.
Mhm.
But one thing that I will ask that you did not mention, do the people in Nigeria believe in the use of psych medications to help their patients?
Like antipsychotic medications?
Yes.
Um, well, that would mean they're going to the doctor and they're being properly diagnosed. And I'm not sure I don't know that they have access to
Mm,
prescription drugs, to be
mm,
quite honest, Mark. So,
mm,
maybe if they were in the
mm.
hospital, I don't know. That's a question I need to ask Calvin, but like they don't even have a crisis number that they can call. Like I'm talking, there is zero services other than what Lead is providing.
That's it.
That's it.
So basically,
Unless you can pay to go to see a psychologist. And again, that's a very few people in Nigeria who have the financial means to be able to do that.
if you're dealing with a mental health crisis, you're just out there.
Mhm. Yeah, there's no one to go to. And then
Right.
again, a lot of people aren't asking for help when they are struggling because of all the things I talked about, the stigma, the religious component, the fear of being jailed if they're having suicidal thoughts.
So you can go to jail if you have a mental health crisis.
Well, if there's a suicidal
Yeah,
attempt.
suicide
Yep.
attempt.
Yep. So you're criminalized for being unwell.
If you get put in jail, does that mean that it's solving the problem?
Nope.
Because it's not solving the problem.
Nope.
You're
You're adding to the problem.
right. Now I really want to check out because I, I need help. I know I need it, but you guys are telling me basically to fuck off.
Well, and now I'm a criminal because I needed help
You're a criminal.
and I was struggling. Yeah,
What?
100%. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know.
I'm laughing because it's ridiculous.
So
Not because
ridiculous.
it's not funny, but it's
It's sad. It's so
it,
sad.
it is.
Yeah.
It is. I, I'm having suicidal thoughts and I'm going to be jailed for that.
Hmm. Well,
And
not the thoughts, the action. Yeah, potentially, if someone had the action.
and even the religious aspect of that, it just compounds the problem because people may think, oh, because I'm schizophrenic, for example, that means that I'm possessed or something.
Hmm. Or I'm not a good Christian. I need to pray more to God. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And so even asking for the help becomes really difficult because, right, because of those layers. Like who would even risk, saying I'm struggling, I need help if that those were the things they were facing.
Yeah.
Hence why the suicide rate is so high.
You mentioned during our initial conversation that 10 people commit suicide on a daily basis over there.
That was Canada. So 12 people a day in Canada are dying by suicide.
Oh, okay. I got it mixed up.
Yeah. No, that's okay. Yeah. It's really hard to know the exact rates in Nigeria because again of the family shame and stigma.
Mm.
And I don't know that their what their process is for when someone dies. Like in Canada, if someone dies unexpectedly, like for example, my sister, when she was found deceased in her apartment, there was an autopsy done, as well as an investigation to determine what happened. And so in our country, either the medical examiner will has to rule on the death. So, was it an intentional death in like in suicide, or was it an accidental death? And so her death was ruled accidental, an accidental overdose for, a few different reasons that the medical examiner believed that it was accidental, not intentional. So I don't know how robust their their processes are in Nigeria. I'm going to say probably not very, just given their population size and lack of resources, in determining cause of death. So I don't know that their suicide rates are actually going to be very accurate.
It seems as though the odds are really stacked against those who are
Mhm.
dealing with mental health crisis because of the religious aspect, of because of the social aspects, and the lack of resources to help them.
Yeah.
It's just it compounds the problem. And like you said, even even with the advent of antipsychotic medication to help them, it's not available. It's
No.
not available. So it's like, what do you do?
Well, and not all there's it'd be only a small portion of people who would need antipsychotics. It's, all the people who need the interventions like therapy, right? Or a crisis line just to talk them through, a crisis. There's none of that. Yeah,
Nothing.
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 So I think LEAD is on the right track with a lot of their models. So getting into the schools and really talking and trying to get talk to those kids about normalizing, mental health is not a religious thing. It's, it shouldn't be criminalized. It's just part of our physical well-being. And just like sometimes you get sick with a cold, sometimes our mental health is impacted, and really trying to normalize and take the shame and stigma out of it. Um, Hopefully those kiddos are going back to their families and having those conversations. And LEAD is also trying to identify, individuals within communities that are really leaders in the field of mental health in that area, where they're having those conversations, and at least they're a safe person somebody in that community can go to connect with, and some get some level of support. It's probably not going to be the support they would need in terms of a professional intervention, but something is also better than nothing. And I think normalizing for people, they're not alone, they're not crazy. This isn't a religious thing. This is just, something people go through. Just like if someone, gets diabetes, let's figure out what they need to get their sugars, under control. It's no different. We need to normalize it just as we would any other physical illness. And so I know they're just doing a lot with not a lot of resources, and I just commend the work that they're doing. And sometimes I'm just depleted. I'm like, oh, how are you doing this? Like it just keeps like wall after wall. And Calvin just has such a positive attitude. He's like, I just pray and I'm grateful, and I know the little bits that we're doing is making a difference, and head down and keep going and push through is kind of their philosophy, because I'm not sure what other options they have at this point. So,
Mm. Phew. Yeah, yeah. In our initial conversation, Trina, you mentioned that you competed in the Ironman and also multiple triathlons and marathons. So, what was the connection for you between fitness and mental resilience?
mm. Those things feel like a lifetime ago now already. Probably from about 2010 to 2019. I competed in a series of triathlons. So, initially it was watching my husband cross the finish line of a sprint triathlon. So for those who aren't familiar, that's a swim, bike, and run. So the sprint level triathlon was a 750-meter swim, 20K bike, and a 5K run. And so I remember thinking the first time he told me he was going to do this, I thought, you are insane. Like, why would you? That just sounds awful. Like, ew,
Mhm.
gross. Anyways, he trained, and it was race day, and I was at the finish line watching all these incredible individuals cross. And these were moms and dads and grandpas and people of all athletic abilities and all body sizes. And I just remember being so incredibly inspired. And I remember thinking, well, that's incredible. Like they've just done an incredible thing. I wonder if I could do this. And I remember being inspired in that moment, but then my monster got really loud, and my monster said to me, it laughed at me and it said, you can't do triathlon. Like, who are you kidding?
Mm.
You can't even run, and you're fat. Like that's the chatter that our monster says to us as a way to keep us small.
I call it
And
thinking.
yeah, and so, I was really kind of deflated in that moment. But then we were driving home, and I kept thinking about this, and got inspired again. And I just thought, no, I'm doing this. And again, my monster tried to get loud, and I'm just like, no, like sit down and shut up. I'm doing this. And you're right, I can't run, but I can learn. And so, I sort of trained, and I ended up doing the race the following year, that same race my husband did. And you know what? I almost came in dead last. And I'm going to be honest, I hated absolutely every single minute of it.
Mm.
The whole time my mom's just like, why are you doing this? And this sucks. And this is brutal. And what made you think you could do this? Like the whole time. But the minute I crossed that finish line, all of that disappeared. And I was just so proud of myself, and, so filled with, inspiration of, I did this. I did it. It was super hard. And I hated every minute, but I pushed through. And so those are the moments. And I'm not saying you have to go out and do a triathlon to build resilience. But those are the moments where we push through the hard, where we push ourselves out of our comfort zone, where we challenge ourselves. That's where our resilience grows. That's where what we call our window of tolerance grows. So, you know what? That following year, I signed up for another triathlon. And before I knew that, it was another triathlon. And then we were all of a sudden, the swim wasn't in the pool, the swim was in an open water, which was kind of a new level of terrifying. And so, as I did the triathlons, and honestly, probably the first five, I still hated every single minute of it. But it was this moment of, but I did it. I didn't really like it. It was really hard, but I did it anyway. And like, yay, look at me. And so it pushes the threshold where your brain goes, okay, well, you did that. What's next? And my husband was continuing to do bigger distances. So I was always kind of in awe of him and what he was doing. And he really inspired me. And it was 2018, and we were in Arizona, and I watched him at the Ironman, and I was again so inspired, and it was the most incredible, weekend, and so electric, and it was contagious. And I remember again watching people cross that finish line thinking, you know what, could I do this? And so again, my monster tried to get loud and say, you know what, you don't have the time or the dedication, because that's a whole level of training that I never experienced. And I'm like, no, I absolutely can do this. And so the following year, for the next 12 months, I ate, slept, breathed, training. It was pretty intense. I didn't do a full distance like my husband did. I did it's called the Ironman 70.3. So, oh, what was the distances? So it ended up being almost a 2 kilometer swim, a 90 kilometer bike, and a 21 kilometer run. And I
Mm,
didn't hate every minute of it. I hated probably the last quarter of it, but and it builds your resilience, it builds your confidence, it builds your skill, and those are transferable, off the race course. Because your brain goes, you know what, this is really hard and uncomfortable, but you've got this because you've done all these other things. So triathlon's just, kept my window of tolerance growing and growing and growing. And, after that Ironman, I got the Ironman symbol tattooed onto my wrist here. And it's just my visual representation that anytime I'm like, my monster gets loud and tells me I can't do something, it's that visual um, reminder of looking down and going, yes, I absolutely can. I've done very hard things before and I can do hard things again. And it's in those moments of hard that we grow and we expand and, we achieve things in that space that we never thought possible.
absolutely. And uh, you know, I always hated running. Even whenever all my life I just hated running. And when I went to the Marines, we had to run, and oh, I hated it. And I just turned 56, and I still hate running. I mean, I can honestly say that I don't think that I will ever love it. I'm resilient enough to admit it. I, I can admit it. I'll do it, but I can never say, "Oh, I love running." I mean, I love being out in the nature and walking, and I walk all day, but running, man, yeah, that's another animal right there, man. But on a brighter note, there's a comment here that's for you
Okay.
on the Facebook chat. Elizabeth says, "I am proud of you. That's amazing. What a feeling of accomplishment."
Thank you.
Yes, and that you should you you have every right to feel. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, you've done things that a lot of people couldn't do,
Well,
wouldn't do.
I think there's a difference between wouldn't and couldn't, right? I think we tell ourselves we couldn't do it. Like really, if anybody can put the time into the training, you can do it.
Mm,
If you can swim, if you can bike, and in running, really, I learned it's just one foot in the front of the other, just at a faster pace,
mhm.
right? I hear that I could never do that. It's like, well, you could never do that, or you don't want to ever do that. Because I think those are two separate things, right? Is it the monster in your head telling you can't do it? Or it's like, for example, my husband's has uh, parachuted and he parachuted, yeah, skydiving. You use a parachute. He skydived and he wants to do it again. I'm like, no, it's not that I can't. It's like, hell no, I have no desire to jump out of a perfectly good working plane. Like, that's just ludicrous to me. Like, that's my line. And so it's not that my monster's saying I can't. It's like, I have no interest. So I think there's a difference that people need to ask themselves. Is it that your monster's telling you you can't?
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, I think, there's, you have the ability to tell your monster to sit down and shut up and show them you can, or it's that you have absolutely zero desire. I think those are two different aspects.
Mm, mm. Okay. One last question.
Sure.
If you had the opportunity to go back in time and give a message to your younger self, what would it be?
That I'm worthy just as I am, and I absolutely am enough. That self-love comes from inside. It's not something other people can give you. It's not a compliment. It's nothing that accomplishments can give you. It's completely internal. So I think that would be definitely the message I would give the younger version of Trina, because I spent a lot of years chasing that that recognition that I was enough externally. And so it took me a long time to find out it isn't in anything external. It comes purely from inside. And, saying that I'm the love of my life is one of the best things my experiences and my trauma and my healing has given me.
Hmm. One here's a question here in the chat. How did you get to the point to tell the monster in your head, leave me alone? What tips can you give someone to continue pushing?
I think I'm trying to think what
What
I
tips?
think I was just tired. Well, first of all, that what told me to kind of tell my monster to sit down and shut up was that I was just tired of listening to it. I was tired of playing small. I knew I knew I had a bigger life to live, and I was living in this small, confined, safe space that my monster was keeping me in. And I was just tired. I was fed up of that. But I also knew, to make it shut up, I had to push myself to do things that scared the hell out of me. And so it was just pushing through the uncomfortable.
Mm.
So that's kind of what got me to that point. And what was the second part of that question? Sorry, Mark.
What tips can you give someone to continue pushing?
Do one thing that scares you. Think of something this week that scares you. Maybe it's having a hard conversation that you've been avoiding, or maybe it's, you know, giving your feedback in that meeting that you've kept quiet in because you're scared of what people are going to say or think about you. Pick one thing that scares you and just do it. Just push yourself through it. Your monster's going to be really loud and try and talk you out of it. Just tell it to sit down and shut up, that you've got this.
Mhm.
Because it's going to amplify risk. It's going to make you believe all these big worst case scenarios are going to, happen. And 9 times out of 10, those things don't happen. And regardless of the outcome, when you push yourself through, celebrate that. Maybe it wasn't the outcome you wanted, but there's still learning in that and ability to grow from that. Like, God, I came in dead last. I could have totally focused on the fact, oh my God, I'm last. People are laughing at me. What a joke I am. Like, I could have focused on that, but I didn't. I chose to focus on the fact that I crossed the finish line, which is what my goal was. And you know what? There's lots of people out there who didn't even do a race. So
Mhm.
it's also about our mindset and what we choose to focus on. Where focus goes, energy flows. So if you're focusing on the negative, you're going to get a lot more, negative results. Whereas if you're focusing on the positive, regardless of the outcome, God, I've fallen flat on my face lots of times, but it's like, okay, what did I learn? What am I going to do differently? And let's move on and learn from this and grow from it. And that's resiliency, right?
That's right. That's right. How can people get a hold of your book?
So it's on Amazon, or they can order it through my website. So my website is trinaleekennedy.ca. And
How
so
can
there's a link there. Yeah.
how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I would love them to reach out to me on social media. So my handle on Instagram is Trina L. Kennedy, all one word. And on Facebook, I'm Trina Lee Kennedy. And same with LinkedIn, Trina Lee Kennedy.
WKD. Okay. All right. One last comment before we close.
Okay.
My wife Gabrielle said, "You finished," and that in itself is slash was amazing, and that is amazing that you
Thank
did.
you.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Trina Kennedy, I appreciate you for taking the time to come and speak with me. Uh, Go enjoy the rest of your day with your family because you deserve it.
Thank you. And thank you to you, Mark, for having these conversations, because it's these conversations that's going to start to, break down the stigma that still surrounds mental health. I think especially being a man, speaking up about your own experiences is so, so important to model,
Mhm.
right, what these
Yes,
conversations can and should look like. So, keep doing the great, incredible work you're doing, and, one conversation at a time.
that's the goal, one at a time. And uh, this this is fun for me. This is I don't look at this as work. I look at this as doing something that I love, doing something that I'm passionate about,
Mhm.
and uh, I don't want a finish line. I just want to keep going and keep doing what I'm doing to help
Yep,
people open their eyes and open their spirits to doing the work for them
absolutely.
for themselves.
Mhm.
So for me, Trina, I don't want a line. I don't want a finish line. I don't want a glass ceiling. I just give me the sky.
Beautiful.
Give me the role. I'll take that.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful illustration of what life should look like for everyone when we're living in complete alignment with why we're on this earth.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Amen. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Speak Your Truth with Mark Ross podcast. As I always say, guys, it's okay to not be okay. Just do something about it. Have a good rest of your day, Trina. And ladies and
Awesome.
gentlemen, you do the same.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Bye-bye now.
Take care.
All right, bye.